Hello, everyone. My name is William Metzinger, joined by Emily Reifsnyder today on our Into the Darkroom podcast, where we bring in artists and talk to them about their personal experiences, references, as well as any advice for future and upcoming artists. Today we have Sebastian Mejia, right?
Yes, Mejia, that's right.
Perfect. Coming to us from Chile. He is a photographer who showed us his analog photography this morning, as well as several references. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you. This is my first podcast experience.
Well, I am honored that it is with us. So starting off, I just was wondering, you had a lot of references that you showed us today. What was your introduction to photography, or who was your main inspiration for getting started in the medium?
I never had like someone in my family that was a photographer and passed me down a camera and things like that. I think as a kid, I knew I always wanted to be an artist, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So I always liked drawing and everything, but I noticed that I wasn't like super talented. So when I started taking photographs in a more informal way, I realized like, okay, this is my language, it's my technique, because I can rely on my eye and not specifically my hand.
How do you think you would approach photography differently if you didn't have other artists to reference? Because you've provided us with a whole bunch of really interesting artists that you draw inspiration from.
Ooh, good question. I don't know. I would love to just have the experiment of clean slate. But, brains right now are so overloaded with information that it's hard not to be influenced by all of that. But still, what I look for is try and photograph things most direct way as possible, as in having less noise, less things that would interrupt. So I think it has to do with that drive, of just like having the most direct experience possible.
So one of your photo books that you showed us today, what interested you in starting to take your images and put them into a book format?
Yes, I think since Chile is not very big on art exhibitions, I mean, there is a very good museum here and a good museum of contemporary art nowadays. But when I was in high school, I didn't go there that much. So it was mainly through books that I started learning about photography. And I started slowly collecting photo books. I thought it was such a great format for the photograph because it's an intimate relationship. It's like you have the photograph close and you have it to yourself. And it's cheap, reliably, compared to print. You have this sequence that was created generally by the photographer or the editor that has a way of reading these photographs. So all of those factors, I think, are key for a photographic series or body of work, that you can see it up close in an intimate way, see it in a specific order like the artist intended, and just have access to it, not have to go to a museum.
How do you find you go about titling like your photo books and individual pieces? Like, is there anyone you tend to reference for that as well? Or is that something you try and do all on your own?
That's something I have to work on. I am terrible at titling, terrible. But generally the photographs are so deadpan themselves that the titles just go along with that same spirit. It's a photograph of a specific tree, and I would title it just the species of the tree or location or very just general facts that wouldn't interfere much with the reading of the photograph, just like briefly inform it.
When you decided to start practicing art and practicing photography, did you feel any friction within your family or any resistance from your family? Because you did say that art wasn't around much in your family.
Luckily, both of my parents have been very supportive. I was very fortunate that even though, yes, my father never doesn't have like that creative sensibility of making art. He always liked collecting things, collecting arts, collecting painting and objects and things like that. So I think that was very important for the support I got.
Was there a particular reason when you started shooting you got more into analog photography rather than digital?
Just because at the time that I started photographing, it was what was available. I started learning photography in the darkroom. I never stopped doing analog photography. I never stopped learning. It's just a specific tool that I find that has a lot of more possibilities that I can explore. For now, I'm just still at it.
After putting together Panorama, do you have another photo book in mind?
Yes, it's nuts, but I'm working on 2 books at the time right now. One of them is self-published, which is just like the complete opposite of Panorama. The photographs are almost abstract, and the way the sequencing works is kind of crazy. And the other, I just got a grant for it, so I'm happy. And it's some of my color work that has been sitting there for a while, so I'm glad that's going to see the light someday.
Well, congratulations on your grant.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is it about your subject matter that kind of draws you in? Like, how do you choose what you think will make an interesting photograph?
I keep going back to the natural world because I think it has to do with going back to the ideas of the sublime, things that are greater than us. The natural world is always a reminder of that. So I see it in these small observations, but even though they're small, what's important is that they remind you of something bigger, be it a system, or you can go and think about it in spiritual terms, whatever you want. It's something bigger than us.
On a previous podcast, I asked another artist this, and I was interested in what your opinion would be. When you were making Panorama, did you feel like your images made the book or the book made the images? Or in other words, were you trying to figure out the next page or the next image, or did everything kind of just come together for you?
The process for Panorama was editing down. I had so many images. I think we started with 500 images that I just scanned. And then from there, I printed about 150, and we started pasting them on the wall. And then from there, we just moved the images and then waited a while and then went back to the wall and moved them around. It was never like, okay, I'm missing a landscape here that should go in between these 2 photographs, so I'm going to go out and photograph it. No, the material was always there, and I just had to reorganize it and edit it down to a specific type of story.
Was it hard for you to make those cuts?
It was a pleasure. It was good to work with someone else, though. I think when you're by yourself editing, in the sense of just like selecting which images go on the final edit and the final selection, which others don't, is hard. It's good to have like this dialogue and be like, this one, why? And so it's shared responsibility.
Were there any setbacks or struggles you encountered while making your photo book that you hadn't expected?
No, surprisingly, the whole process was very organic. I did it with a group of guys that are now my friends, but at the time I didn't know them, that they were young and they were starting like this self-publishing project. They had done, I think, 2 or 3 books, and they were like, okay, you want to do something? And I was like, yeah, sure. It's good because it was something that I wanted to do by myself for a while, and I needed that external, I don't know if it's approval or motivation or what, but just to get the project started.
Now that it's been a year of the pandemic going on, how has that affected your image making process?
Yes, it's definitely affected. I thought that I would start shooting indoors. I was like, okay, now is my time to do still lifes. And I started and I set up a studio by the window, and I was like, this is going to be great. and it was terrible. I shot a few, and I didn't get motivated, and I quit. And then when we could, go back out when the lockdown was over, I was like, oh, it's gonna be amazing. I'm gonna be so inspired by everything. And it wasn't like that either. I was like, I don't have the complete access to the places I want to go to. It's hard.
Do you have any advice you would give for students who are both just now looking into like graduating from school and like not dealing with having assignments they're making images for, in combination with that pressure of the pandemic and not being able to possibly go where you might need to?
I know it's a challenge. It's a challenge to be graduating right now. I think that that challenge forces you to think outside the box and think of options that you would normally wouldn't consider. So I think that you have to approach it in a very creative manner. The not only artwork, but how you're gonna solve what you do when you graduate. I think that's something that if you can apply your creativity to more practical matters, it's a great way to go.
Along the lines of advice and some guidance, when you were feeling uninspired or it was hard for you to find motivation, how do you push through that and try to continue making work?
I go back to books. I go back to walking really without any specific agenda in mind, and not try to really force it. I'll be like, well, whenever I get the inspiration to photograph again, I'm gonna do it. There's no hurry, and it's slowly coming back. In the meantime, I'm doing more collaborative projects like this Instagram dialogue with Eric, and I have other image exchanges with different artists. It's like if I can't go out, I'm gonna be in front of my computer most of the day. I have to make the most out of this tool, and so I'm collaborating with people in other parts of the world.
What suggestions would you give for anyone who's worked primarily with digital photography, who's looking to get more into analog film?
Just the fact that in school that you have access to darkrooms is such a great thing. It's something that you have to take advantage of. Think of it, especially the color processing and things like that. They're kind of like dinosaurs. Take advantage of that, because it really does give you another point of view on photography. And you're obviously going to go back to digital because digital is what we do now. I mean, for work, for commercial purposes. But I think it will inform the digital photography in a good way.
It's definitely a medium I will miss in the next coming months when I no longer have access to. Final question. Do you have any more advice for us seniors as we graduate and head on into our own journeys? And where can people find your work if they're interested in looking at more of your photos?
As an advice, I recommend just exploring the wide array of purposes that photography has nowadays. It's amazing. Photography is different in the sense that it has always been related to industry and commerce, and nowadays it has gotten so sophisticated that the art world has also penetrated these different realms, be it of fashion, journalism, advertisement. So think of your options in a very, very broad way.
Well, thank you so much, Sebastian.
Oh, and about my work, I am working on my website for years now. But I have my work up on my Instagram, which is Sebastian Mejia Photo.
I'll make sure we go ahead and put that Instagram tag in the description of the SoundCloud for you. Well, thank you again so much, Sebastian. For everyone listening, this was Sebastian Mejia. He came to our photo department this morning and spoke with us. He's now going to do individual crits with us seniors and help us get some final kind words and important critique before we graduate. Thank again for so much for coming on and talking to us, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, William. Critique is going to be rough. No, I'm just kidding.